Hey everybody, thanks for joining in on the message today. My prayer is that it strengthens your faith and encourages your heart and speaks something powerful into your life. If this message turns out to be a blessing to you and speaks to you, would you consider sharing it with someone else? We want to get the word out to as many people as we possibly can. Now join us for this message. Thanks. So we're going to start this series on resilient faith in the book of James. And the reason we're going to do that is because James is what I call the leader or the pastor who talks about faith with blue jeans on. He's got a very real, a very practical, a kind of a raw view of faith. Sometimes we think of faith as sort of a ooey-gooey thing, some sort of a spiritual thing that's way up there somewhere. But the reality is that faith is a more a tangible thing. It's a more tough thing than that. That's the way faith works. And so because James deals with faith that way, we're going to learn about a more real, a more practical, a more tough kind of faith, a more rugged faith. And what James does in his book is that James, he deals with problems right off the bat. He deals with trials, difficulties. And here's why I think he does it. He's laying a foundation for us to get rugged faith by telling us, by showing us that problems, trials, difficulties are actually the fertilizer that causes our faith to really grow strong. So we're going to learn about that today. Let's read the first few verses of the book of James. It starts this way. It says, James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. And he starts right off. These 12 tribes are scattered among the nations, so there's a sense of trial there. But as soon as he says greetings, he dives right into his topic. He says, when all kinds of trials crowd into your lives, see how quickly he dives into that? It's like somebody was coming up to you and saying, hi, I want to talk to you about this. Or, hi, did you know the other day, blah, 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 blah. James he hardly gives his greeting, and he goes straight into his topic. He goes straight into dealing with problems, dealing with trials. You can tell he's had it on his mind before he even started writing. So he says, when all kinds of trials crowd into your lives, don't resent them as intruders, but welcome them as friends. Realize that they come to test your faith and to produce in you the quality of endurance. But let the process go on until that endurance is fully developed, and you will become a person of mature character and integrity with no weak spots. It's amazing. See, what James is letting us know is that the problems that we face can either develop us or they can destroy us. They can make us better or they can make us bitter. And the difference maker, is the instruction that James gives us. He says there's a fresh way, there's a paradigm, there's a lens through which you can see your problems, and there's a right way to respond to your problems. So that if you'll view your problems in a certain way and respond to your problems in a godly way, what will happen is instead of your problems destroying you, they'll develop you. Instead of them taking you out or knocking you down and for the full count, you'll be able to get back up. You'll be able to stay resilient. You'll be able to stay strong even through the midst of the storm. So let's talk about what's this paradigm that James wants to offer you. Well, first of all, he wants you to know trials are inevitable. Trials are just a reality that you're not going to get away from them. No human being gets to opt out of trials. They're the great leveler of humanity. Every one of us goes on them. And James says you can count on this. We are not in heaven right now where everything is perfect. We are on earth where things are broken. And life here on earth is difficult, and that's true for everyone. No one gets a free pass. No one is immune. No one is exempt. Problems are not sort of an elective course that you get to choose whether you take or not. They are required, and you don't get to opt out. And James isn't the only guy who says this. 1 Peter says it very bluntly. 1 Peter 4:12, he says, dear friends, don't be surprised at the fiery trials you're going through, as if something strange is happening to you. This is nothing strange. This is reality. This is what you're going to go to. And here's what happens. If you think there's something strange, if when a trial happens to you and you're like, what? How could that possibly happen to me? Somebody else maybe, but not me. What ends up happening is we end up living in a kind of denial. We end up sort of trying to pretend that they're not there or cover them up or medicate ourselves. And sometimes we just freeze in shock or in terror. And the Bible takes a different approach. The Bible invites us to face our pain head on, to face our suffering, to face our difficulties, to face whatever it is we're going through, our grief, head on. And I think the reason for that is because you can't deal with something that you refuse to acknowledge is there. You see, you can't overcome a trial if you don't believe there is a trial, or if you refuse to acknowledge the trial. And God wants us to be able to overcome through the storms of life, the inevitable storms of life. So we have to take a different tack in the world. A guy named Neil Postman, he wrote a book years ago. He's a social commentator. He wrote a book years ago called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And he says this, he says, our world runs from grief. We're a society consumed with trying to stuff ourselves with amusement, entertainment, excitement, trying to hide our eyes from sadness and place our head in the sand. We move from one high to the next to numb out the bitter reality of emptiness. That's the way our world responds. And it's too bad that our world responds that way, because the truth is, if we would face our pain, we could find healing. If we'd face those difficulties, we could find the way from a more superficial, fluffy, shallow, more false kind of joy that's fleeting, and we could find our way to a true joy that's got depth to it. A true joy that takes us through the valley of mourning to joy. That those who sow in tears, it says in Psalm 126, they'll reap in joy. That those who go through those difficult times find themselves on the other side with that. So faith doesn't deny reality. Faith doesn't pretend it's not there. Faith faces problems head on. It acknowledges we live in a broken world, that we're imperfect, that others are imperfect, that we have an enemy, that we're in a battle. And so when the bullets start flying, we don't go, oh no, what's happening? How can this possibly happen to me? We just simply say, yep, that's inevitable. That's going to happen in my life. And James actually not only tells us that problems are inevitable, he mentions the variable nature of problems. He says there are also all kinds of different problems that crowd into our lives. Not every problem is the same. They come in different shapes. They come in different sizes. They come in different intensities. They come in different frequencies and lengths. Just a few months ago, we didn't even know there was such a thing as COVID-19. That didn't even exist in our world. And now all of a sudden, that's a fresh problem. And along with it comes all kinds of other problems. Isolation issues, mental health issues, economic challenges, job losses, fears, family feuding that goes on in our homes, all these things. Listen, there is all kinds of battles. Problems are not just inevitable, they're variable. There's all kinds of them. And it's actually a good thing to remember. Every person you meet is going through a battle of some sort. And whether it's health or finances or family or friendships or work or mental or emotional or spiritual battles, everyone is facing battles. So battles are inevitable, battles are variable, battles are also unpredictable. Very interesting the way James says this. He says when these trials crowd into your lives. In other words, they're not coming the way you'd like them to. They're not coming at the time you'd like them to. In one translation of this passage, it says, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. What James is saying is, you don't choose trials. Most of the time, we don't plan for the trials that are coming our way. They just come whether we like it or not. That's just the way trials work. And sometimes when trials come, you're like, hey, hang on a second. I had other plans. I had something else I was wanting to do. You ever got a flat tire at the right time? You ever got a flat tire when you were kind of expecting a flat tire? Nobody plans to have a flat tire. You don't get a flat tire when you have lots of extra time and everything's just perfect. No, you get a flat tire at just the wrong time. When you're late or something like that. Or you ever get sick at just the right time? Nobody ever says, oh, this is the perfect time to get sick, right? No, when you get sick, you're like, dang, this is the worst time ever. I wasn't planning for this. Or your baby, his diaper leaks on your clothes just at the wrong time. All those things. None of those trials or problems happen in our lives when we plan for them. So James is very honest here. He says problems are inevitable, they're variable, they're unpredictable. And that can sort of be like, oh, right? Really? It's like I heard this story this week of a doctor who said to his patient, he said, I've got bad news and I've got worse news. Which one do you want first? And the guy said, well, I guess I'll take the bad news. He said, well, the bad news is you got 24 hours to live. Sorry to tell you that. You only got 24 hours to live. And the patient said, wow, doc, what could possibly be worse news than that? And the doctor said, well, the worst news is I forgot to tell you yesterday. That's bad news, and that's worse news, right? And sometimes we can kind of feel like that. Like, James, what are you telling me? Problems are inevitable, they're variable, they're unpredictable. I'm going to be falling into them. How much good is that? But James is actually trying to deliver you and me from a dangerous lie. And that lie is that if you follow Jesus, sometimes we're tempted to believe, wow, if I follow Jesus, everything will go perfect. If I follow Jesus, it's almost like there'll be an invisible bubble around me that'll protect me from anything ever going wrong in my whole life. And the truth is, Satan would love you to believe that lie. Satan can get a hold of us if we believe that nothing bad will ever happen to us. God actually says the opposite. He says, actually, I told you this was going to happen. And the reason why we need to be reminded of that is that if we think that problems will never come our way, when they do, we're tempted to get angry at God, or we're tempted just to get stuck in our own self-pity. So James is trying to deliver us from the temptation to think that somehow following Jesus exempts you from every problem in life. Actually, following Jesus, you'll go through problems just like anybody else does, and you'll actually get a few extra problems. You know that? So problems are a normal part of life in this fallen world, and James just wants you to know that. As hard as that is to hear, it actually helps. But the other thing James is doing is he's actually not just kind of delivering you from that lie. He's actually trying to encourage you. And he encourages us with where he's going with this. He says problems, they're not only inevitable, they're not only variable, they're not only unpredictable. Problems are also purposeful. They're purposeful. And that's why you can be encouraged. That's why you can actually rejoice. That's why you can actually count it all joy or welcome a problem as a friend, because God has a purpose in every problem you face. Now, notice I didn't say God causes every problem you face. He doesn't. Actually, God doesn't cause most of our problems. Most of our problems we cause. Some of our problems other people cause. A few of our problems the devil causes. Probably not as many as we give him credit for, right? Most of our problems just come because we live in a fallen world. So if you're looking for somebody to blame for your problems, you just pick Adam and Eve, right? You just say, man, why'd you guys, sin? Oh, goodness. So God isn't the cause of your problems, but God has a purpose in your problems. And one of the cool miracles through all of the Bible is that God takes even the bad things in your life and he brings good out of them. It's an amazing thing that our God does. It's an amazing miracle. God takes bad things, rough things, difficult things, painful things, and God turns them for good. That's actually why I called this sermon Fertilizer for Your Faith, right? Almost called it Holy Crap. Because our God takes bad things and he does a miracle. He turns them for good somehow. The verse that I've been living with this week, it comes from Genesis chapter 50. It's Joseph. He's talking to his brothers. And he says this to his brothers. He says, you intended to harm me. You meant this for evil. You intended something very bad. But God intended it. God turned it for good. That's what our God does. God is a miracle-working God. He turns something that's very bad, very evil, something those brothers did that God never would have wanted for Joseph to have gone through. But instead of Joseph getting stuck in the abuse of his brothers, instead of Joseph becoming a victim and saying, wow, that's just terrible, I can't believe that ever happened to me, I'll just live as a victim for the rest of my life in a dysfunctional family. My life sucks. No, Joseph realized that God could turn it for good. And then I love what he says next. He says, God brought me to this position so that I could save the lives of many people. Man, what a perspective. God turned that evil situation for good, not only in Joseph's life, but he turned that evil situation for good so that through Joseph's life, many other people's lives could be blessed as well. That's how big, that's how awesome, that's how good our God is. And that's what I've actually been praying for our church and for churches around the world through this season, is that God would turn this time. God would take this terrible situation with COVID-19 and all the evil that is. And I don't think God caused that, but I think God can turn it for good in your life, and then God can turn it for good through your life to other people's lives. Let me give you an example of what I think James is saying here. He's saying God produces something good out of this, therefore you can have joy in it. I love travel. I love going around the world. I love seeing the rest of the world and experiencing different cultures and meeting different people from different places, trying different foods. I love going to another country. But on my way to travel to another country, I have to go through various kinds of pain and suffering. I have to head to airports where there's security lines. And I don't know about you, but I don't particularly like security lines. Many times I have to get sleep at the wrong times, and I go through sort of sleepless nights. I have to sit in a big can with a whole bunch of other people stuck in an airplane, right? Stuck in a little seat, and it's hard on my legs and hard on my feet and awkward, hard on my back. And sometimes I'm paranoid of the germs that are around me. I go through all of that pain of traveling because I have something good on the other side, right? I don't know about you, but probably my least favorite part of traveling is actually those security pieces, right? Going into those security lines, sometimes you forget to take the right things out, and they bleep, and you got to go over to the other side. Actually, the last time I traveled, I ended up in some big city somewhere in the world. I can't even remember where I was, but I was in this city, and they did a swab of my fingers, and it set off an alarm. And there's security guards start coming from different places, and they're like, oh my goodness, you set off one of our alarms. And I said, well, I'm sorry. And they said, wow, we're going to have to, go through all your stuff. And they went through my stuff, and they were swabbing all of it. And one of the things in my bag set off a different alarm. Now I'd set off 2 alarms. There's even more security guards coming, and people now all around the airport are kind of looking over, and they're looking at me. And one of the security guards says, we're going to have to give you a pat down, a full pat down. I said, no problem, let's just get this over with, do this. And he said, well, would you like a private room for the pat down? I said, no, that's fine. I'm just right here. Just go for it. Well, I didn't realize when they said a full pat down, they meant a full pat down. Man, I'm in front of all these people, and they're doing like the full meal deal pat down. And it was quite an experience. I'll tell you, there was some suffering that went on there. I thought, man, I don't need a private room. I want a lawyer, this is crazy. But anyway, I got through it. And I got to wherever I was going, and I'm sure I had a blast in that other country. So you get my point. You go through suffering, you go through pain, because you see something that it's producing. You see something on the other side. It's just like when a woman gets pregnant. What do we say to her? Do we go, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, that's too bad that happened to you. No, we say, congratulations. That's awesome. Not congratulations because you're going to get nauseous, right, for a few weeks. Not congratulations because you're going to go through the pain of childbirth. Not congratulations because after childbirth you're going to go through some sleepless nights and it's going to cost you a whole bunch of money. Right? We know all that suffering is coming. But we say congratulations because we know there's purpose in the pain. We know that there's a life, there's something to celebrate, there's something to enjoy there. And that's exactly what James is talking about here. He says, man, that God is doing something good through your trial, through your difficulty, through your storm. And when you can see that, and when you can key in on that, when you can focus on that and take that as your paradigm through the difficulty, then you can gain a godly attitude, and then you can make the most of it. See, the reality is when we're in a storm, we rarely understand the storm. We rarely grasp all the reasons why and all the stuff of the storm. In fact, if you sit and try to understand the storm too long, that'll sometimes get you stuck in your storm. A lot of times, I think one of the biggest paradigm shifts for us to really make the most of our storms is to stop asking why. To stop trying to find blame. Was this my fault? Was this God's fault? Is this the devil's fault? Is this someone else's fault? Stop asking why. And when you can switch from why to what? What is God doing? What is God teaching me? What is God wanting to take me through this storm for? Instead of blaming, just say, man, I'm okay with living in the mystery. I'm okay with not fully understanding the storms of my life. I simply want God to make the most of them. Sometimes I'll say it this way, just to myself. If I'm going to go through this, I don't want to waste it. If I'm going to go through the school of hard knocks, God, help me be a good student so I don't have to go through it again. If I'm going to experience this pain, God, at least let's make the most of it. And so James says, man, there is some good things that God's going to do through your pain. And he actually names them. He says, I can tell you what some of the purposes of your pain is. He says, pain refines your faith. That's one thing it does. The text actually says, realize that these problems come and they test your faith. And that term test in the Bible is actually a refining term. It's talking about heating it up so much so that with precious metals in particular, when we heat them up, they separate out the impurities and it actually burns off the impurities or you're able to skim them out. And it's the same is true with us. Often we don't even know what's in us. Right? Until we go through the difficulty, until we go through the trial. One person said it this way: people are like tea bags. When we get in hot water, then what's in us comes out. And that's true for all of us. I mean, you've probably found that through this COVID-19 crisis in your life and probably in some of the people you know's lives, some of your loved ones' lives. As the heat goes on, some of this stuff in us kind of comes to the surface. And it's not always pretty, right? It's not always things that we wish we were there. But the heat shows those things up, things that we often can cover up, things that we often, sometimes shame, sometimes insecurity, sometimes anger, bitterness, hurt, anxiety, all these things, they get brought to the surface. And it's as they're brought to the surface that we can either skim them off, or sometimes even God just uses the trial to burn them off. And they go in our lives. And I'll tell you, that's something we can be thankful for. James says not only do they refine your faith, they actually develop your endurance. They produce in you that quality of endurance. And this is what the whole series that we're on. Endurance is such a wonderful gift. It's staying power, that ability to handle pressure and be resilient and bounce back. It's one of the greatest qualities that we can learn. But how do you get endurance? Do you know how you get endurance? You get pressure put on you. You learn how to handle pressure by handling pressure. That's how you learn. You gain endurance by being put in situations where you need endurance. You don't gain endurance by reading a book about endurance. You don't. You don't gain endurance by, it's like running a marathon. If somebody came to you and said, I'm going to run a marathon, you say, wow, that's awesome. Have you been preparing? Oh, yeah, I've been preparing for 2 years for this marathon. Wow, what have you been doing to prepare for the marathon? Right? They say, oh, I've been reading books about marathons. You say, wow, good for you. You doing any running? Oh, no, I don't need to run. I've read all the books about marathons in the world. Well, you can read all the books on marathons, but if you're not actually training your lungs, if you're not actually getting out there and putting pressure against your lungs so that they grow in their capacity, all the reading in the world is not going to help you. And so how do you build endurance? How do you develop endurance? Well, you go through some stuff. And that's really how James concludes the benefits of trials. He says, actually, they really mature your character. They refine your faith, they strengthen your endurance, and they mature your character. And I love this verse, James chapter 1, verse 4. Let the process go on, right? Don't abandon what God is doing before he's finished his work. Let the process go on until that endurance is fully developed, and you will become a person of mature character and integrity with no weak spots. Man, what a gift. That as we engage in the trial with God, as we engage God's purpose in the trial, God takes all the imperfections, takes all the weak spots. Wouldn't it be awesome if somebody said that about you or me? That guy, that gal has no weak spots in their character. None at all. Listen, I've told you this many times. God is more interested in our character than he is in our comfort. God's goal is not just to make you happy. God's goal is to make you his. God's goal is to make you and me like Jesus. God's goal is that you and I would think like and act like and love like and be like Jesus. God's goal is that we would gain the love and the joy and the peace and the patience and the kindness of Jesus in our character. But how do you gain that? Well, the way God produces those things in us is by allowing us to be in the opposite situation. You gain patience by being in a situation where you're tempted to be impatient, right? You learn love when you get around some unlovely people. Then you are forced to learn love and be challenged to be loved. You learn joy. You know where you learn joy? You learn joy in the middle of grief. That's where you learn joy. You learn gratitude more when things are actually taken away from you. And then you go, wow, makes me realize what I have to appreciate. You learn kindness in situations where you're tempted to be rude or selfish. So one of the blessings of a heavier burden is that it actually gives us a stronger back. C.S. Lewis one time, this country went into war, and he made this statement. He said, this war has come just in time for me. I was becoming far too complacent. Wow. So trials can be beneficial in our lives. They can be like fertilizer, refining our faith and building our endurance and maturing our character. But that doesn't happen automatically. The truth is, trials can actually grow us or shrink us. Trials can actually refine us or destroy our faith. They can actually build endurance or they can break down our endurance. It was 5 weeks ago that I stood before our congregation just as this COVID thing was breaking out. And I said, guys, this is going to end someday. I don't know when it's going to end. It's going to end sometime, and it's gone on a lot longer than most of us thought it would, and it looks like it's still going to go. But I said to our church, and I said to you all, I said, look, this is going to end at some point, and the question will be at the end of this, what are we like now? What are we like at the end of this? How have I changed as this crisis has gone on in my life? Because the truth is, we'll be different coming out the other side of this trial. And we need to learn how to respond in the right way so that this trial produces great things in my life. As crazy as it sounds, God can use COVID-19. He didn't cause it, but God can use it to produce great things in our lives. So how do we do this? Let me conclude by giving you 3 things we can do quickly to respond rightly to trials in our lives so that they produce, so that they act like fertilizer, refining our faith, producing endurance and maturing our character. So the first thing we can do is rejoice in them. As crazy as that sounds, we can choose joy in the midst of our trials. And that doesn't mean to just fake it and put on a plastic smile and pretend everything's okay. You know, it's not acknowledging reality. It's saying I can choose joy even though I'm going through pain. And it's not being a masochist and sort of saying, I love pain, bring it on, give me more pain. We don't rejoice for the pain. We rejoice for what the pain produces. Okay? So we're not sort of running towards pain going, yay, give me more pain. That's not a God-honoring attitude at all. But we rejoice in the midst of the problems, in the midst of the difficulties. And that takes some deliberation. That takes some challenge. That takes choosing joy in the midst of it. That's why I love the way James said it, count it all joy, right? Because I will rejoice. I will choose this attitude. I'll choose my own attitude, no matter what it is that I'm going through. So maybe I could say it like this. You will eat your broccoli whether you like it or not, but your attitude during your broccoli while you eat it is up to you, right? So we're not giving you the choice whether, we don't get a choice whether we go through the trials, but we do get a choice as to how we go through them. We're called to rejoice. Second thing is request. We turn to God and we ask God for wisdom. Look how James invites us to do that. If in the process any of you doesn't know how to meet any particular problem, you only have to ask God, who gives generously to all men without making them feel guilty. And you may be sure that the necessary wisdom will be given to you. Wow. See, we're asking God, God, give me wisdom so I can make the most of this difficulty, so I can make the most of this problem. And actually, when you turn towards God in your problem, what it does is it gets your eyes off the problem and it gets you onto God, who is your source. It gets us away from just whining and wallowing in our difficulties, and it helps us start moving towards solution-oriented thinking. So you rejoice, you request, and the third thing you do is you relax. Relax. James says, just ask in faith, don't doubt. Trust God in the middle of it. It's one of the biggest things God asks of us in the trials and in the difficulties of our lives. He asks us to relax. He asks us to put things in his hands. He asks us to trust him. 1 Peter 5:8 says, cast your cares on God. He cares for you. He cares for you. And stressing out and getting all worked up about it is not going to produce anything good in your life. I love this story of a farmer who had a weather vane on his barn. It's just one of those things that kind of blows in the wind, tells you which way the wind is blowing. And on that weather vane, it read across it, God is love. God is love. He had a friend over at his house one day, and his friend was kind of a skeptic. And his friend saw the weather vane, and he said, hey, does that mean that God's love is just as changeable as the wind? It just blows whatever direction? The farmer looked back at his friend, and he says, you know what it means to me? It means that God is love no matter which way the wind is blowing. I'm just trusting God's love no matter what I see on the outside or no matter what it seems like on the outside. If you ever get a chance to look at one of those weavers on a weaving loom who's weaving out a big carpet or a big picture, one of the striking things about those weaving looms is that underneath the rug, underneath the picture that's being created, it's not very beautiful at all. In fact, underneath, all you really see is a mess of knots and colors. But when you look at the other side, you'll see that there's a beautiful pattern, a beautiful picture being made. And what God tells us in His Word is that from this side of heaven, many of our situations, we simply will not know. We simply will not see all that God is doing. From this side of heaven, there will be many times where all we can see is the knots and the mess of colors. But God promises you and me that He's working things for our good. God promises you and me that He is a good God and that He can be trusted, and that one day, we will see things from the other side, and we will see the beautiful tapestry that He has been weaving in the story of our lives, if we will trust Him. Let me close with one more verse. This is James chapter 1, verse 12. James says this just a few verses later. He says, "Blessed is the person who perseveres under trial, because when he has stood the test." In other words, this trial is going to end someday. And if you'll persevere, if you'll keep going, look what will happen. He will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love Him. In other words, in Christ, if you'll persevere, if you'll keep on going, there is always life ahead. There's always a future. There's always hope. There's always a third day. There's always a third day. And what James is just telling us is he's saying, look, if you'll view your suffering differently, if you'll see your problems as fertilizer for your faith, then you can let them shape you. You can let them shape you without letting them define you. Instead of becoming bitter and letting your problems define you, you can become better and let your problems shape you. Instead of being destroyed by the storm, you can actually be developed, be strengthened by the storm. Instead of being a victim of your problems, you can be an overcomer in the midst of your problems. Instead of getting stuck in them, you can persevere until you're through to the other side, and you'll come through the other side stronger, more like Jesus, more with God's character, with a deeper sense of what joy and gratitude and love and patience and kindness and endurance really are. Hey everybody, thanks for watching the message today. I hope that message was a huge blessing to you and spoke to your life. If you made a decision for Jesus today, we would love to know about it. If you could head over to our website at victoryMJ.com and tell us, that would be fantastic. Also, if this message was a blessing to you, we'd love for you to help us get the word out. You can do that by liking, subscribing, or even by giving. And if you're interested in making a donation to our ministry, again, you can do that over at victorymj.com. Thanks everybody for joining in, and God bless.